how they were nurtured as they were growing up in religious terms. And in scientific terms, as soon as you come to is there life after death, the first thing you think of is the scientist looking at you and giving you a dirty look if you say yes, and saying, what are you talking about? You have no proof. Where's the scientific proof that there is actually life after death? And this whole idea of proving is, especially within the scientific community, becomes, if someone believes, if someone who's a scientist, a man or woman of science, and says they believe in life after death, anything like that, they almost are looked at not being very bright in the head, something is missing, something is wrong. I was reading a quote by Deepak Chopra that he said, sorry about the glasses, guys. It's called age. At times, we venerate some of the rebels of the soul, but we also keep them at an arm's length because believing in the material world has become a sort of survival mechanism identified with being sane. So for a person of science to say, I believe in life after death, they would never come forward and say something like that because, are you crazy? Your reputation's on the line here. You're a person of science. And science hasn't proved anything yet. So even though we know there's enough evidence throughout history, and enough even Allan Kardec, with all the research he did, he was a man of science. There is enough proof out there, and if you go out there, there's lots of material. But, people are skeptical, and science almost tells them that they have to be skeptical, otherwise they can't be regarded as a scientist. So, one interesting comment, I was watching a movie the other day that was actually recommended in one of the books that I read called Contact. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it. It's about probably 7 or 8 years old. Jodie Foster is in it. And she's a scientist and astrophysics, all that. And she is really a person of science. She's trying to prove that she could get communication from out of space. Okay, at this point in time, she's not trying to prove there's life after death because she does not believe in that. She's a true person of science. But she has this gut feeling that there's something there and she wants to prove it. So, the whole movie, she's trying to do that. It's quite interesting, the movie. So, she was very close to her father, who had passed away. Her mother died at birth. And she was an extremely intelligent woman. And at one point in the movie, she argues that, unless science proves you can't make a case, black or white, it's got to be proved by science. And she meets this man who is a spiritual leader, and she was talking about that, and he said to her, did you love your father? She goes, yeah. And he goes, prove it. She thinks about it. How can she prove that she loved her father? She adored her father. You could see in the movie how she was attached to her father. It was her life. She had no way of proving. Well, she could talk about it, but I have feelings. Okay, well, how do you prove that? And she could say, a daughter always loves his father. Well, that doesn't go very far, right? We all fall into these ideas of, just because I'm the mother, I have to love, just because I'm the father, I have to love, just because I'm the child, I have to love. But we've seen lots of examples when that has not happened. She's lost for words. And she starts to think, maybe I have to start changing the way I look at things and the way I see things, which she doesn't. But it kind of plants the seed. And it's the same idea, I guess, with most people of science. And that quote really got me going. How do you prove you love someone? It's a gut feeling, something you know from inside, right? So anyway, this guy Jerry Schwartz. He's a professor of medicine, neurology, psychiatry, psychology at a university in Arizona right now. He was a professor at Yale, got his PhD at Harvard. The guy's brilliant. One of his books that I was reading, there was a part that I said, whoa, I can't follow this. And I just kind of tried my best. Very mathematical, but great book, by the way, once you get over the mathematical part. Great book. And he proves the existence of God through science. It's really amazing. Anyway, so this guy, Dr. Schwartz, scientist working in a university, he wanted to prove that there was a connection between love and health. Okay, so already a little bit outside of the normal way of thinking for most scientists, but just had that interest. He had done a fair amount of work in the area of psychosomatic medicine and psychology and all that. So he started having that interest, trying to get funding for his research, which was quite difficult because, again, it was a bit of out-of-the-box thinking here. And he had before he met this other doctor, he had gone to a symposium in Colorado. There was it was the International Society for Subtle Energy and Energy Medicine. He had seen that, he was interested, so he decided he would go. But he was really afraid of being caught as a scientist in something like kind of a bit, not very scientific, he thought. So instead of, usually when he went to workshops or conferences, he had the university pay for him to go. Quite often he was a speaker in one of these conferences. So he said, he paid his way. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't tell anyone that he was going. He goes to the workshop, he goes to Denver. He said when he got there, he all sat at the back. He didn't wear a name tag because he was afraid of being recognized. So it's like, no one knows who I am. And he was just blown away with what he had heard and seen at this conference. And apparently at the end of the conference, they asked for people to come to the front, anyone, and give whatever message they want about the conference, give their feedback or their 2 cents worth. So he said, I don't know what came over me. I went. So, and he went up and he did his little spiel, whatever. He actually got people even singing. And he forgot all about it. Left the conference, went back to his home. Years later, he's at a scientific conference, and he meets this other doctor, Dr. Linda Rusek. When he meets her, she goes, I know you from somewhere. He said, no, I don't have any recollection of ever meeting you. No, I know her. Hey, weren't you at that conference in Colorado? And he's like, oh, of all people and all places. And she goes, I remember you went up to the front and you start, then he was going. And he's like totally thinking, what did I do now? I'm ruined. My career is ruined. Anyway, after talking to this woman, Linda Rusek, they came to see that they had a lot in common. He and Linda had been working on a very interesting project, and her father was a cardiologist and a professor at Harvard. But in the 50s, there was a study that was done with students in Harvard, medical students, about the effect of stress at university. And the study was published, and the study included many medical exams as well as a whole bunch of surveys that all these students that were participating in the study had to answer. And was published then in the 50s. Dr. Rusek, I'm going to say Linda just for the sake of being easier, since I know her very well. And her father was a prominent cardiologist, picked up this study years later and followed up, contacted all these previous medical students from Harvard and asked if they were interested in conducting kind of a post-study. And most of them said yes, so they were able to gather. They already had a fair amount of information, including all their medical files, but they updated all the information. It was an enormous amount of work, and it was an enormous study. But all the point of this that I wanted to say is because it's a little bit off the topic, but I thought it was quite interesting. Their finding eventually is actually, once they start looking back, and they actually went and examined all these people again, and they wanted to make a connection about how you handle stress and how and your health. Okay, and what they found totally unexpectedly was that the people who felt really loved in their early years of life by their father and mother, had a very loving figure in their lives, actually showed an enormous difference from the people who didn't, health-wise. So these were people that were very healthy despite the same amount of stress as the others in the study. So it was a startling discovery, and when Linda found that, she started saying that there was a connection, yes, between love and health. When she met then Dr. Gary Schwartz, there was like, bang, right away, right? Because he wanted to find funding for his research in that area, psychosomatic and all that. So they felt they had a lot in common, they connected. Okay? So, he then went on to start, he and Linda then went on to start they decided that they will, one day when they were talking, she asked him in their conversation, do you believe in life after death? Do you believe that our consciousness actually survives death? And he said yes. And she says, like, how do you back that up? And this is what he said. How is it possible for the starlight from distant stars to continue forever, even after the star has died? A fundamental premise of contemporary astrophysics. Yet we, as masses of energy, why wouldn't human beings have the same opportunity for our personal biophotons? He told her that he came to that conclusion when one day he was looking at the night sky somewhere he was, and all of a sudden, he starts thinking how we see all these stars in the sky, and we know that most of them are no longer there, but their light is shining, and they go through millions of light years, and they never die. So most of the stars that we see at night are no longer there. We just see that light. That's when you start thinking, oh, if that energy keeps going, why wouldn't our personal human energy, our individualism, our conscious, as thinking in terms of energy? And he goes on to give you a very long explanation in the book that also gets very scientific and goes into quantum physics and all that for those who are interested. But I'm not going to go into that. Anyway, so they decided, okay, she was thinking, okay, well, that makes sense. And the reason she had asked him that is because her father, again, who was a very influential figure in her life, a person who she loved dearly, had passed away a few years back. So they decided that together, kind of under the radar, they were going to try to do a little bit of research, but because they were scientists. Again, here comes that whole reputation thing. So they said, you know what, just the two of us, let's see what we can do. Let's start doing some research, start doing some reading, see what we can dig up. Okay? So they started. And eventually, everything evolved. And right now, actually, he works in a lab called the Laboratory for Advances in Consciousness and Health. And this was his motto from the beginning. If it's real, it will be revealed. If it's fake, we'll find a mistake. This is where they started, the two of them. So, fair enough, they went on, trying to find as much as they could, read as much as they could, research as much as they could. And as much as you want to keep these things under the radar, a bit always leaks here and there. And he did have friends who were doctors.